Hello and welcome to Career Talk. I'm Lee Hopwood, the CEO at the CCMA and host of this very live show where I chat with contact centre professionals about their career journeys so far. And why do I do this? Apart from the fact that I love chatting to people and finding out what they're up to, the intention is to inspire others in the industry and also that new generation that is looking at what it's like to work in the contact centre. And joining me today is Alex Storer, who is Head of Inclusion and Belonging at OVO. Hi, Alex.
Hello, great to be here.
Thank you for joining me. Now, over the last few months, I've been asking a lot of questions about diversity in our sector, and there is a really clear message coming through, one that I'm really proud of, in that I'm beginning to think that it is the most diverse workplace in UK business. I'm starting to get the feeling from various folk that actually, yeah, we probably are most diverse. So when I saw that Alex was responsible for inclusion and belonging, I thought I need to find out a little bit more. So first, Alex, we do hear a lot about DEEB, diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. First of all, can you tell us what we mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's great to be here. And also great to connect with the part of the business that I am not so involved day to day, because I tend to work more in the kind of people functions. But as I will share with you throughout the talk, I'm so proud of the work that our kind of care community have done in this space. For me, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, they all have obviously very different meanings, and they are part of a journey, I think, that starts with understanding how society works and how there are barriers and injustices that exist at systemic level because of historical reasons, societal reasons. And the more we unpack that, the more we understand the need for each of those letters. You said, there's probably a lot of focus historically. There has been more focus on diversity, which is what we see. And, it's fairly straightforward, I hope, for people to think about, yes, our businesses need to represent what we see in society. So that's the diversity bit, which I hope should be, fairly non-controversial, that you want a business that represents your clients and your customers and, your beneficiaries. The inclusion and equity bit is, I think, where perhaps sometimes people get a little bit more confused or unsure. Inclusion is about the behaviors, the culture that we create at work so that diversity can really thrive. And that means that it will feel different in different companies. It will look different in terms of the initiatives. And the equity bit for me is really important, because that means different approaches, different interventions. It's not good enough to say we'll treat everyone equally, which sounds like the right thing to do, but actually it's about understanding what each individual needs to be at their best, so that B really comes to life, that belonging piece, which it's a feeling, right? So if all the things that we've done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion are working, then everyone feels like they belong. Everyone feels value. They feel welcomed in that space, respected for who they are, and not despite of who they are, exactly for what they bring, for the diversity that they bring. And that gives us all a sense of belonging and an ability to just do great things for our communities.
Absolutely. And that leads to happiness. And we all know that if you're happy, you just exceed all your expectations and are successful in whichever way success means to you. But so you're head of inclusion and belonging at OVO. You don't work specifically in the contact centre. You support the contact centre. So you're part of a support team. What does it mean to be head of inclusion and belonging? What do you do every day? What are you responsible for?
Yeah. And of course, our care communities is one of the biggest one in terms of business areas. So I do tend to spend a lot of time with business leaders in that area, so our operations and care leaders, to understand how we can support one of the biggest communities we have. But my day job, I think, has changed over time, and the nature of these roles is that it will change over time. I was brought into the role as a new role that didn't exist before in 2020, when OVO acquired a much bigger business, which is, again, quite unusual, but it created real challenges in terms of the culture and, kind of creating one culture where we could all thrive. OVO, 900 people at the time, acquires SSC, 6,000 people at the time, a much bigger footprint and a very different working culture, the southwest of England versus Scotland, all of those things. And the founder, Stephen Fitzpatrick, had the foresight of thinking we're going to need we need to be intentional around curating our culture, creating an inclusive, welcoming space for all, and understanding what that means for different parts of our community. So at that time, 3 years ago, my job was very much thinking about that strategy, setting up our ambitions, a lot of talks with our C-suite to make them fully understand why this was important. The founder was on board, but that didn't mean that all of his executive team was on board. And so a lot of uncomfortable conversations for all of us, really, to kind of start exploring what that meant for them. Fast forward, 3 years later, my role, now that we've got an established strategy, we've got a number of networks that are helping us influence and organize things day to day, it's become more of a coach and an advisor, again, to the leaders in big spaces like the care space. I will work with Alison, for example, to really think about how we bring this belonging feeling to life. What's the next level now that we've done the foundation work around representation, having inclusive policies, all of that kind of stuff that you need to have. How do we bring belonging to life in a way that is even more impactful? How do we make it more personal? We've done the infrastructure work. Now we want to make it personal for each and every one of our community. So I spend a lot more time having those kind of more nuanced conversations now.
So that must have been quite a challenge. If I go back 3 or 4 years, fantastic, founder is on board. But I suspect that an exec leadership team, I'm going to completely stereotype now, would have been hard pushed, some of them, to properly understand what diversity and inclusion, equity and belonging is, and let alone be on board. How did you make that switch? How did you explain to them just how important it is?
It was hard and it took time, but it started with creating spaces where they could have honest conversations with me, because often we just expect our leaders to engage, and we give them a speech someone has written for them and said, please say all these things in front of everyone. I started in a slightly different way, which meant I spent probably the first 6 months in the role just having confidential conversations, at the beginning one-on-one, and then just with the C-suite as a group, and asking them what their understanding was, if they had any questions. And they opened up, and I think they never had the opportunity to have those conversations in a very honest and unfiltered way. I'll give you an example. He's now left, so he probably won't mind, but our chief financial officer at the time was talking about the fact that having conversations like that with me made him realize that when he hires for senior roles, so director level, director of finance, whatever, he realized that he had clear bias towards men, because he thought that women wouldn't be as career driven, that at some point they would go maternity or whatever. So, and he said, I have never said that before in front of anyone. So having those conversations, started to kind of give them that sense that it's okay to be biased. We all are. It's okay to have some, perhaps have made decisions in the past that weren't the best one, and how could we move forward together in a way that was a lot more impactful for the business. And that's where we always brought it back to belonging, equity, diversity, and inclusion. They were essential components of our success as a business. We say that we want to bring everyone on a journey to net zero. That everyone bit, we mean it. It's not just a word that we included in the mission because it sounds nice. And it forced our leaders to change the way they thought about these things, and to see that there was an urgency in thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion for the business and for themselves. I'll come back to that later, I guess, but we really talk about a lot the kind of leaders that we need, what makes you successful as a leader, and inclusive behaviors, inclusive thinking is a key skill in there.
Wow, that you must be so proud to have done what you've done in the last 3 years, to be in a position where you've got that strategy in place and that actually you're now absolutely embedding it. That you must be really proud of that.
I am, and it's been such a collective effort, and I think people talk about top down, bottom up. I think for us there was a little bit of everything, but it was definitely led from the top, with very honest conversations from all of the leaders, leaning into that conversation with their business areas and thinking, what does that mean for us? And we saw that in the in the engagement surveys, the kind of results that we see in terms of how people feel. We have a belonging score, so we ask a number of questions, and it's been incredible. Across the last 3 years, we had an acquisition, COVID, the energy crisis, a cost of living crisis, wars, and all sorts of things that, and yet that score kept increasing over time. We went from 7 back in 2020 to 8.8 today. And that's despite all the stuff that was happening. So I think we're doing something right. But for me, the biggest thing was that we empowered our people, and that's very true in the care space, to be authentic and to tell us what was not working for them, to be very open about that, and knowing that there would be no judgment, quite the opposite, that we would act on that as much as possible and as quickly as possible.
Nice. Now, I'm very curious as to how you get a job doing what you do. So we've got to take it back to the beginning. Now, I've just learned that you're Italian. When you were at school, what did you want to do? What did you have a view about what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah. I've always been driven, and I'll probably talk to this later as well, but I've always been driven by a deep sense of justice. And, maybe it's part of, my identity because of the injustices that I've experienced since I was young, but also, anyway, sense of justice. And like, what I always thought I wanted to do was to make the world a better place, of course. But my thing was specifically, I wanted to become a diplomat, because I thought that by doing that, I would kind of use the power and influence of diplomacy and all of that stuff to really affect change in the world. And it's quite topical actually at the moment. What my passion as I was going to kind of uni was the Middle East peace process, and how we could maybe kind of accelerate that. I'll pause here because things have changed clearly, but that's what I wanted to be when I was a kid, and when I started kind of build my future self in a way, kind of preparing myself for the future. I thought I wanted to be a diplomat.
And as we talk through your career, you can see where that's been, I'm going to say, tried and tested. So what did you do at university?
So uni was a mix, was an international school that was kind of, again, geared towards the diplomatic career. So I did a BA in law, in international and human rights law, and then a master's in international relations with a specialism on diplomacy. So it was kind of a little school that was then preparing you to enter the diplomatic career. And my first assignment was in Jerusalem with the Italian consulate. So that's where I started my career.
So go on, tell us a little bit more about that role.
Yeah, so that role, it's where I kind of probably started to open my eyes to the reality of how, like, certainly the diplomatic career in Italy works. Probably there's other countries where diplomacy has more of a, it's more driven by the right values. But for Italy, it was purely, an economic, kind of, we were using our diplomatic influence to gain economic advantage for Italy, and it was very apparent there, where there were two parts, where one was clearly a lot more influential economically, so we were always unconditionally just support that one part. So it made me realize that probably if I wanted to change the world and make it a better place, politics and diplomacy wasn't going to be the right thing for me. And I think always being clear about what was driving me led me to the right things. So from Jerusalem, I moved to Brussels because there was an opportunity to work with the European Union on EU-funded projects that were supporting human rights conversations across the North Africa and Middle East region. So I moved there and worked with the EU for a couple of years. But again, so it was more in the kind of non-governmental kind of function. But again, I felt like we're trying to change big things and it would take generations. And I was probably finding things about myself, like I'm quite impatient. I wanted to see change. I wanted to see that I was having an impact. I was making a difference. And I'll cut a long story short, but after Brussels, I spent some time in Tunisia. I set up a new office there for the EU. And at that point, I started to realize that wasn't the career that was going to give me that sense of fulfillment. Moved to London 2012 and kind of started in the charity sector, which I loved. But again, I was looking for purpose. I was looking for impact, and I kind of stumbled across this kind of diversity and inclusion at the beginning. It was called D&I, and it was very much about setting up those initial, kind of initiatives in the workplace. And I thought, this is great. I can affect change at a much smaller scale. When you look at even big employers, they are very small compared to 7 billion people, living on this planet. And by affecting change in that smaller ecosystem, you can actually then influence wider societal change. Because we spend so much time at work, what we see, what we hear, what we're influenced by at work will probably, influence the way that we behave outside of work. And so I very quickly since then started to kind of build a career more in the diversity and inclusion space. Went through Mind, the Law Society, and then opened my own consultancy. And I was really happy as a consultant, happy, being my own boss, and but was also quite lonely. So when Ovo came along and said, "Oh, we think you might have the right profile because we're looking for someone, a bit with that kind of consultancy approach to come in and help us build this whole thing from scratch," so I'll give it a go. And I loved it so much. And I found a place, and again, for me, it's really important, that aligns with my values, with what I care about and how I want to operate in the day-to-day. And I know that it's a privilege to find an organization like that is purpose-driven, value-driven, that is truly living the values that are, sometimes for other companies, maybe just a print on the wall. In our case, they're very much driving us. And one of our values is do what's right. And that's what, that I think that sums up what I want to do in life, to do what's right and to have impact, a positive impact on others. So yeah, that's a very quick, run through my career. But as I was going through it and I was reflecting back, I think, especially now that I'm feeling a bit more settled, I was kind of worried that my career didn't have like a linear path, that I went from one place to another and I was trying to kind of find out what I really wanted to do. But I think that's what gave it real value now, and for those that are listening and maybe you're thinking about your next career move, really think about what drives you, what is the thing that makes you feel proud of who you are and that you want to live by. And if there's a way to incorporate that in your next career move, even if it doesn't feel entirely like a linear choice for you, do that.
Do you know what? That whole, I'm sure as we come out of school, those that have a clear view of the direction they want to go in, I suspect that there is a linear path to get there, or at least we all think that there's a linear path to get there. But I think the reality is that no, in order to build yourself out, in order to build out your competencies, your experiences, you do need to try different things. And wow, what an experience you've had from going from home in Italy to working in Jerusalem, which would have been fascinating, I'm absolutely sure, to being in Tunisia and then coming into London. I mean, your experiences, the wealth that you've got behind you is just fascinating. And please tell us, so you mentioned you were at Mind. Tell us maybe one or two of the projects that you did at Mind. Tell us a little bit more about what you did there.
I think, yeah, that was my first real opportunity to work on projects that were supporting people that were facing disadvantage or barriers in society. So my role at Mind, the title at the time was Equality Improvement Manager. And it was about understanding how certain communities don't benefit from the services that Mind was providing. So they have a network of local services, local mental health services that are free for the community. And yet they were only being accessed by a certain type of person, that, had a certain understanding, education, connections. And There were all sorts of groups, young people, particularly from an ethnic minority background, asylum seekers and refugees, women from some backgrounds. For example, I worked a lot with South Asian women, LGBT people. There were groups that were not accessing our services for a number of reasons, fear of judgment, fear that they wouldn't be accepted, misunderstanding in terms of what the services actually were. And I run a few projects with those communities that I'm really proud of. One with the Refugee Council that helped us increase access for asylum seekers and refugees, especially in London. One in the Southwest where we launched the first trans mental health helpline that was run by and for trans people. And a project in Birmingham with young Black men, which was called Up My Street. And it was about meeting young people where they were at, literally in the streets, and using music and creative arts to encourage them to think about their well-being and their mental health and start engaging with those providers in a different way. So that wasn't quite workplace, based of diversity inclusion. It was more about service provision. But I loved it. And it's great to see the charities like Mind are now working a lot closer with corporates to also bring those services into the workplace, and make sure that we benefit as employees as well as doing good and fundraise and volunteer for charities. But I see the corporate and the charity world coming closer together now, out of necessity sometimes, with COVID and everything that is going on. But it's great that it's we're and because we live lives that I think are a lot more complex now. Work and life blends in ways that are very different from pre-COVID. And I think that means that our people want to see those conversations and those partnerships happening in a much more meaningful way at work, so that we can talk about things that really matter to them.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so what about the Law Society? Because I would expect that to be quite a different place to work at Mind. So what were the kind of things you got up to at the Law Society?
So Law Society was the proper, the first proper kind of D&I advisor role. So I was managing projects for the profession. So this was kind of working with different law firms to understand what barriers, what challenges they were facing in the diversity and inclusion space. Again, interestingly, we're still very much DEI. The belonging piece, I think, has come to life in the last 3 to 5 years. And also very conservative, generally speaking, very conservative workplaces. And they were very driven by just, kind of seeing numbers. So it was very much about diversity, especially in the leadership. And I was privileged to work on a campaign because 2018 marked the 100th anniversary of Women in Law. So it was only 100 years ago when, well, a little bit more now, 105, whatever, since the first women were allowed into the profession, in a profession that has existed for millennia. It's crazy to think that, just over 100 years ago, women weren't allowed to vote, weren't allowed to be doctors and lawyers and things like that. And yeah, we worked on a really big campaign to celebrate that, but to also drive change, because the law and many other sectors, they don't have enough women in leadership. And I think that has a direct impact on the culture. When you don't have that representation, when you don't bring different perspectives, personalities, when everyone is the same, in leadership, they create a culture that only works for them. And I think that, that's why it's important to have leadership, diversity in leadership, as well as across the rest of the organization. And I'll be honest with you, Lee, because it was tough for the Law Society. It was, as an environment, was not the easiest, and very different from where I am today. I found that I couldn't do what I thought was right. There was a lot of red tape. There was a lot of, no, can't do that. Why? Just because that's not how we do things here. And I hate that, because if someone can give you a good, robust explanation as to why you can't do something, or why you shouldn't be doing something that you think is right, it's a warning sign that probably and there's plenty of toxic workplaces out there. So we need to be aware of that and sense check that where we are today. And again, to the listeners, I'm not encouraging you to leave your job today, but make sure that you do everything you can to shape a culture in your workplace that feels right for you. Don't be passive, don't be a bystander. And if you can't, then probably you need to consider to move into one of the very many organizations out there that do offer a culture that is more inclusive and more authentic, more genuine. That's what led me to become a consultant, honestly, because I thought, based on the experience with the Law Society, I probably wouldn't want to be an employee anymore. I needed to be my own boss, and never thought that I would go back into the corporate space. So it's been quite a surprise, and again, a privilege to find a company like Hovo that respects me and my opinions, listens to me. But more than anything, I think where leaders understand that they don't have all the answers, and they need to be vulnerable, and they need to ask people like me and others across the business. If we look at the care community, our leaders in that space are really trusted by our exec, by our board, to do what's right, even when it might look a bit odd. Why are we doing these things? I'm not fully understanding as a leader, but they're trusted because we're closer to the people that work in that space. And that's quite unique, because for leaders it's really hard to give up control. That idea that you don't have full control on some decisions or whatever, and just trusting someone else with that. So yeah.
So and on that note, I am going to ask you a question that I think it's a hard question to ask. You're going to tell me it's actually a really easy question to answer. But you worked in Jerusalem. Right now, in the contact center community, there will be some challenging conversations going on, I have no doubt, because of the Israel-Gaza situation. What's your take on this? How would you be advising contact centers to be dealing with that particular situation?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing it up, because that is a really live example of the things that affect our people. And that's the first kind of consideration I will share, that people might assume that it will only affect those that are directly connected because they are Muslim, they're Jews, or they come from Israel, they come from Palestine. Well, actually it affects everyone. And I think it's important that workplaces recognize that and create a safe space where our people can talk about that. That's what we've done. Like, it's really hard to stay focused on the human aspect and not becoming political and not taking sides. But we were clear that whilst we're not going to debate what's going on and what the solution should be, and who's right and who's wrong, what we are going to create space to discuss is how it makes our people feel, and across the spectrum. And it was great when we started quite tentatively, just offering kind of small drop-in sessions. If you are affected by this and you want to take a bit of a break, we've got this drop-in with some of our mental health first aiders as well, people that were trained to have conversations, and myself. And we saw that were a lot of people that were coming that were just interested in understanding how we could talk about it. They were not personally directly affected, they said, but their teams were affected. They saw people within their teams that maybe were struggling at work because of the anxiety and all of that pain that they were carrying with them. And so creating spaces and giving a bit of guidance to our people leaders and the squad leads that look after our care teams, to just ask that question and say, we know that this is going on. We know that we won't be the ones finding the solution, but what we can do is create a space for our people to tell us what they need from us to feel a bit better. And sometimes that meant that they needed a slightly longer break, or they needed to be able to talk to someone about it, so we had the mental health first aiders, or they just needed to see Ovo facing into that conversation. I've read an article about a company that I'm not going to name that fired someone because they came into work with a Palestinian flag. And we don't know the detail of what happened, but the reason that was given to the individual is that the company is not political and doesn't allow any flags brought into the workplace. And this individual said, what about the rainbow flag? Every Pride, you litter this office with rainbows. Is that not political? And we use that example, because in the same way that we want to talk about LGBT rights, and that will conflict sometimes with some religious beliefs, for example, and we face into those conversations every day at work, because There isn't a month that goes by that I don't receive a question about that, in terms of how we balance, religious beliefs and perhaps LGBT conversations. The Gaza-Israel conflict was the same. It was balancing a conversation where there's always going to be difference of opinions, but we always brought it back to the humanity of it, and being able to be in a respectful, safe space where we just understood what we could do to just be there for each other with empathy, not necessarily needing to agree with the other person, but knowing that if we feel connected, if we feel a bit of that kind of empathy, then we'll be able to do a better job. And we don't need to be the best of friends outside of work, but when we are at work, we need to be there for each other.
Yes. Do you know what? That's so true. We are a human industry. We're a very people-centric industry. We are here for each other. And I think that was great words of advice there. So, what has been the best advice that you've ever received? I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? For some reason I
Yes.
couldn't hear you. I
Oh,
can hear you again now.
oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry.
Did you get any of what I said? No.
Please do. No,
Oh,
I thought it
I'm
was
so sorry.
me, but no. So
No.
if you can go back to what was the best advice you've
The
ever
best
heard, that would
advice,
be fab.
I'll keep it short. Sorry, I've probably spoken for a minute, and I was muted. Uh, you know, something that I mentioned before, I discovered more becoming, getting older, and also understanding that I have ADHD, but I'm very, very impatient. And I often thought that if things didn't happen fast enough, that was my fault. And if I didn't achieve something in the timescales that I wanted, it was my fault. And actually, the best advice I was ever given was, you need to be patient, you need to slow down, and you need to be kind with yourself and with others. Because ultimately, like you said before, this is very much about humans coming together and understanding each other. And when we talk about diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion, this is very human stuff. This is not just building a product. And so I can't just expect people to work at my pace all the time or to always agree with me. So being patient and being kind is probably the best advice I was ever given.
I love that. And really love that, because I do think that clearly I got very excited there around that advice as my screen started wobbling. But that being kind, that was a big thing a couple of years ago, and I'm really hoping that people are still shouting that hashtag be kind. Absolutely. So so you've had an fascinating career, and I genuinely could sit and listen to you and talk about all the things that you've done for a long, long time. What do you think is really key to a successful career?
Yeah, we touched on this before. I think, for me, it's been being very clear what my key driver was. And I said it before, I think if I had to sum it up in one word, my key driver is justice. And I've become more purposeful and more intentional in crafting a career that allows me, and choosing things in my career that allow me to fulfill that need, to feel aligned with a sense of justice. Everyone has their own drivers, and for some, and it doesn't have to be grand things, like I hate myself sometimes for feeling so strongly about justice. And it gets me involved in all sorts of things. Like I volunteer for a number of charities for Pride and all of this, and I have zero time for myself. And I hate myself for that, because like I so wish there could I just have time to chill sometimes. So, please don't feel bad if your driver is you want a great work-life balance, you want financial stability, you want a family, but you need to be honest with yourself in terms of what your driver is and use that to craft your career, because it's so easy to just stumble into careers and just stay there because it's easy, because it's comfortable. But then when you're not going to be successful in a space that doesn't fulfill you. So for me is, being always aligned with what my core driver was. That for me has been the secret of my career.
Love that. By the way, you have fabulous fingernails.
Ah!
I love that. I love that. They keep appearing and disappearing. I love that. I love that. I've got a few more questions for you. One of them is, what do you wish that you'd learned sooner?
Yeah, I think it's connecting and it's kind of flowing with what we were just discussing. And I wish, and it comes with, I guess, maturity and confidence, but I wish I'd learned sooner that if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Don't just stay in a role or do something because it's comfortable, but you feel like, I'm not sure about this. So I wish I took a leap of faith, even sooner, before, when I felt that maybe, even when there was nothing particularly wrong. But I'll give you two example. Mind, which I loved as an organization and I still support. I've been there for over 5 years. To be entirely honest, after the first 3, I probably knew that I wasn't going to grow anymore, because my role was very specific around running certain projects. There wasn't anyone above me. And I knew that I was getting comfortable, and I probably should have jumped into the next career opportunity to, continue to grow sooner. At the Law Society, after a year, I knew that something was wrong. I knew that wasn't the right culture for me. And yet I stayed longer because I was scared of change. I was scared of taking that leap of faith. And then eventually I did.
You
And
must have learned. You must have learned quite a lot during those extra years at the Law Society that will have influenced how you view the world today.
Oh yeah, 100%. You're right. So, and maybe see again that it's probably linked to my impatience, because you're right. Thank you. This is becoming more of a counseling session. And it's probably, yes, you probably find learnings in the most unexpected places, right? And even the worst of things that happen to you shape you, and then will probably translate into something positive further down the line. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And you know what, even if it is that you've learned what you don't like, that's one of the things that comes through when I chat to folk like you on CareerTalk, is that they might have taken a step in their career that maybe wasn't quite what they wanted or hoped it would be, but as a result they learned what they didn't like, which is just as powerful as learning what you do like doing. Fascinating. Do you know what? I've so loved chatting with you, Alex. Now I've got my I always finish with 3 quick questions. So what did you have for dinner last night?
Well, because of that, I just said, like, I was at a charity event yesterday, so it was like little canapes throughout, and I left so hungry.
You had a posh dinner.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so now this could be controversial. It might be easy. Apple or Samsung?
For me, it's easy, Samsung. And interesting, I mean, Apple is changing now, but at the very beginning, the reason was because I didn't feel that Apple was allowing me to express myself enough. It wasn't customizable enough in the way that, was presenting the options. And Samsung has always been a little bit more customizable. So that was more aligned with my personality.
Oh, I love that. I love that answer. Just for the balance, I'm Apple. And do you have a hidden talent other than potentially being able to do your nails? Because I can't do my nails.
Right?
Do you have a hidden talent?
You know what? And hopefully it's not that hidden, but I was thinking about what is my talent? What is my superpower? And I think, and that has shaped my career as well. I think I'm a super networker. I really enjoy connecting with people and also connecting people to each other, creating networks of people that make us bigger than just the sum of the parts. Like, we can all do work individually and we can all do good things. But if we start connecting and, joining the dots, thinking we could work together on this, we can learn from that. And I spot those opportunities internally and externally. So I think my talent is connections connecting with people, networking.
Oh, do you know what? I love that. Alex, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. Please do keep doing the work that you're doing, especially in the contact centre. As we said right at the top of the conversation, you're here supporting the contact centre at OVO. But it's been brilliant. Thank you so much. And if you want to listen to more career talks, I do this about twice a month. So there are more on ccma.org.uk, and I can't wait to see you all again soon. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.